Hi, how is everyone doing? We are going to begin shortly in the next few minutes as people start to come in. But if you all want to take a look at the slide just for some notes for this webinar, that'd be great. So we'll start shortly. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Mike Navarrete. I am one of the marketing associates for CHC. I work specifically in logistics and media management. Um, just a few housekeeping rules before we begin the webinar. You will be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you hover over your screen with your mouse, you will see a few features. We will be using specifically the chat feature. So if you have any comments, responses, feedback throughout the presentation, please do chat us. And then we will also be using the Q&A feature. So if you have any specific questions, please do write your questions there. And I will be moderating the Q&A towards the end of the presentation. We're going to try to use the last 30 minutes or so for questions. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge this unprecedented time that we are all experiencing. And I just want to let everyone know that we are in this together. If you need any support or guidance, we are here for you. And our website is chconline.org in case anyone has any questions about the services we provide and the work that we do. So just a quick overview of CHC and who we are. We are a community-based nonprofit organization, and we've been around in the community for almost 70 years now, and we provide mental health and educational services for children, teens, and young adults. These are just a few of the areas that we try to instill in our kiddos. So learning how to learn, developing grit and resilience, being able to realize your dreams, making friends, feeling better, how to be autonomous, how to have self-awareness, how to advocate for oneself, social emotional learning, executive functioning skills, really the processes that allow kids to be efficient and effective in their day-to-day lives. And then here is just the heart of the work that we do. We believe in the promise and potential of every child, teen, and young adult. Our mission is, like I had mentioned in the previous slide, just allowing kids to live their fullest and brightest successful lives, not just in the academic setting, but also
at home
and in life in general. And then we strive to remove social, emotional barriers to learning and mental health, regardless of language, location, or ability to pay. We do have bilingual clinicians. We have 3 locations, a location in Palo Alto off of Clark Way, one in East Palo Alto called Ravenswood, and then one in San Jose off of Kenwood Avenue. And then we also offer a plethora of resources on our resource library for free on our website. So if you go to chconline.org/resource library, you can check out our resources that we have on there. And it is a huge privilege of mine to work for CHC2. As I had mentioned, I manage a lot of our media. So if you go to our YouTube channel, CHC Online Palo Alto, that is our handle, you were able to find past recordings from community education sessions and then other CHC related content on there as well. And at CHC, we believe in a multidisciplinary approach, not just with academic skills, but also mental health and wellness, learning how to learn, and physical development. So really taking a look at the whole child and how they can be resilient, happy, and successful in their lives. Here are our 4 areas of expertise: ADHD, anxiety and depression, learning differences, and autism. And sometimes what we see at CHC is what we call comorbidity. So sometimes a kid may not just have ADHD, but they also may have a learning difference or anxiety and depression. So we really try to take a look, a holistic approach when it comes to all things wellness and mental health and education. And here are our 4 divisions: our clinical services division, where we offer psychoeducational assessments, therapy options, consultation. We have a intensive outpatient program for kiddos that have emotional behavior dysregulation. And then in relation to tonight's presentation, we have a program called ESPA, which is Early Support Program for Autism. It's a joint program with Stanford Children's Health and CHC Clinical Services. And through that program, we offer shared resources, parent education, connecting with, helping you connect with providers and navigating education and healthcare. And then we have our 2 schools: Sandhill School, which is for kiddos with language-based learning differences, and that's an independent school. And then we have our Esther B. Clark schools, which are non-public school for kiddos with social, emotional, or behavioral challenges. And then we have our community education, community connections division, which is what you're experiencing through this webinar. And at CHC, we offer an all-inclusive, safe environment for folks. And then here is the specific link. You can get more information about our community connections division. We offer parent education, professional development for educators. We have an outreach program, and we have a teen wellness committee. So there's a lot of great resources and teams that work through our community connections division. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers tonight. We have Andi Solochek, who is a CHC speech language pathologist, and Melanie Shu, who is a clinical psychologist for CHC.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Dr. Melanie Shu. I'm a clinical psychologist, as Mike said, and I'm also the early childhood program manager on the Medi-Cal side, as well as the manager for evaluations for 6+. And then Miss Andi.
I'm Andi Solochek. I am one of the speech and language pathologists at Children's Health Council. I work primarily in the center or on the private pay side at Children's Health Council, and I also provide support to the students and teachers at Sandhill School.
So today we're going to start with, just to tell you a little bit about what to expect in our presentation, we're going to start with a very brief overview of autism and then discuss the areas that we want to target in building social skills in children with ASD, and then go more specifically into interventions and supports. So please note that some of our slides have examples that we may not go into in depth because of time constraints, but we wanted you to have access to them in the slide deck. Okay, oops. So the CDC actually just released new prevalence rates last week. And so now we have gone up from 1 in 58 children to 1 in 54. So these are the kind of areas that we're going to be talking about in terms of early diagnosis. A diagnosis age is starting to get earlier, so now we can start making diagnoses as early as 18 months. And of course, as we know, autism spectrum disorder now encompasses other diagnoses such as pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified and Asperger's disorder. It is still about 4 times more common in boys compared to girls, and also occurs in all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups. For context, 1 in 54 is 1.85% of children, and in contrast, about 1 in 6 or 17% of children have a developmental disability, including ADHD, cerebral palsy, blindness, and autism spectrum disorder. So in reference to how ASD is seen across all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups, what we've also seen now is that we seem to be catching up in identifying ethnic minorities and getting access to early diagnosis. And in this last survey, they were able to show that the diagnosis rate seemed to be equal among most ethnic groups. So what we do want to also acknowledge is that autism is a spectrum disorder. And so there's a wide range of presentations, and this is in parallel to how children in general have a wide range of behaviors and of presentations. And so we do want to acknowledge that the interventions that we're talking about, we're trying to stay general so that we can address multiple different people. However, there will need to be individualization for particular children. So we're going to be trying to be broad while still acknowledging the fact that there's a lot of different presentations along the spectrum.
So one of the harder things about social skills and kids with ASD is that social happens literally everywhere. So these pictures are just kind of barely touching the surface. And even within these pictures, there are multiple different kind of social interactions happening just within one picture. So for example, if you're in that first picture with two girls on the playground, right, you have to think about the girl who is on that spinning thing and what is she thinking about, how much fun she's having. And then the girl who's running around her and she's thinking about the other girl and kind of what all of the social norms are there. Even when you think about sitting in a classroom in that next picture, you're thinking about if you're a kid in the classroom, you need to be thinking about what am I doing to make others feel comfortable around me? When is it the expected time to raise my hand? And then thinking about, oh, what do I do if the teacher calls on me? And then conversely, what do I do if the teacher doesn't call on me? So not only does social happen everywhere, but it really happens kind of all the time. And that's kind of what we're going to dive into today. So these are kind of just some different areas. When thinking about kind of the social mind, we have to think about kind of all of these different stages and levels. Michelle Garcia Winner is kind of a guru in this like concept of social thinking, lowercase, social thinking skills. And she talks a lot about these different areas. So understanding of your own mind and then others' minds, emotional coping, incorporating mental health challenges, social problem solving, peer interactions, self-awareness, academic skills, bullying, tricks, mental manipulation. All of these are super important and kind of make up that social mind. So when we think about different social interactions, as we've said, so social happens everywhere all the time. I would say even for most neurotypical learners, social interactions are quite complex. So if you layer some of those, some of the challenges that kids on the autism spectrum have, you now have an even more complex scenario. So social interactions incorporate several different pieces. They take into account affect, such as tone of voice, your mood. How are you feeling when you have a social interaction with other people? How are other people feeling? Kind of the mood or the tone of the whole situation. You have to take into account facial expressions, your own and others' facial expressions, body language. What is the message someone's sending you non-verbally, just in the way they're sitting or the way they're standing near you, maybe even the way they're sharing space with you. Gestures, so making sense of how people are used, not only what they're doing, but how are they using their hands or their tone of voice to emphasize a message. Thinking about then how you have to relate to others. Timing is part of a social interaction. So when is it expected to make a comment or ask a question, or when is it expected to join a group? And then above all, you need to also integrate each of these different pieces. So again, you'll hear this message over and over again. Social interactions are quite complex. You can often think of kind of social interactions as a ladder. So especially for some younger children, we think about this visual of a ladder, but this first bullet point kind of goes on the bottom. So we have shared attention, that's that joint attention you hear a lot about, social referencing, mutual engagement, social anticipation, problem solving, and abstract thinking. And so the idea of thinking about it as a ladder is just as you have to climb up a ladder, you kind of need that shared attention to be established first before you can build on all of those other skills, which is why kind of teaching these skills so explicitly is really important before jumping right in and hoping that many kids are successful with these things. Then, when you think about taking those steps on the ladder and then moving into kind of the social behaviors, so then you get into some of those more kind of behaviors that are expected when kids are in preschool. So things like sharing space and sharing materials and waiting and taking turns and trying new things, and then listening to others and participating with others and choosing friends and making friends and keeping friends. All of those kind of are incorporated into some of these things. And again, you can kind of see how even if you started sharing space, it's going to be hard to participate with others in any type of group if you're having trouble sharing space and sharing materials and waiting and taking turns. So they all build on each other. These days, I would say children are expected to kind of know most of these things as soon as they get into school. So you'll see that, oftentimes there are professionals who think that social skills are separate from academic skills, but the reality is that they're highly, highly intertwined. The problem is like I said, many kids are just expected to know these things, but what we know about our kids on the spectrum is that they need these skills taught explicitly. So they are not, though, they're not taught like things, concepts such as, the 3 R's of recycling, or, how to, we practice doing fire drills and things like that, but we're not taught just simply how to share materials, right? Or how to notice what someone else is doing. So these are just, we have a couple examples here of just some different ways that our children are sort of, like I said, expected to succeed. So these are just some Common Core standards for kindergarten. So they should be able to participate in collaborative conversations with diverse partners about kindergarten topics in small and large groups. I would say for a kindergartner on the autism spectrum, this is extremely challenging. Then you add on listening and taking turns about the topics and texts under discussion. So that means attending into what your teacher is saying. That means you're listening to and taking their perspective, right? And then again, being able to continue a conversation through multiple exchanges. And that's just at kindergarten. Then you have to think about, well, in 3rd grade, they should be able to engage effectively in a range of collaborative discussions. Again, I think this is particularly challenging for, even 5th graders on the autism spectrum sometimes. And I know that that's a general statement, but again, we're speaking pretty broadly here. Then in 6th grade, they're supposed to pose and respond to specific questions and detail by making with elaboration and detail by making comments that contribute to the topic text, or issue under discussion. I'm sure we all know those kids who feel like they're making comments on that contribute to the topic, but they might be way off topic, right? And just have a good idea that they think is a really good idea, and feel like they're contributing, but it's really off topic, right? And so again, super challenging. Then by the time they're in 7th grade, they're expected to pose and respond to specific questions with elaboration and detail by making comments that contribute to the topic, text, or issue under discussion. And then this one, acknowledge new information expressed by others, and when warranted, modify their own views. So if we think about our kids on the spectrum, even as we are asking them to modify what they're doing or modify their desires within the home context. Now add on your entire classroom of kids, and we're asking students to modify their views based on kind of what the academic content, right? So what the point here is that all of these standards, while presented as academic skills, are actually founded in social thinking and social learning skills, which makes it that much more important that we support our kids on the spectrum in various ways. So, as we know, these kids need our help, which is why most of you are here tuning into our webinar today. And so we have some good resources and things that we would like to share with you about how we can help. So, first things first, speech and language therapy. As a speech language pathologist, I often find that families are surprised that SLPs, as we're called, can focus on social skills. In the speech and language world, they call them pragmatic language or social skills. They have a variety of different labels. But the American Speech Hearing Association specifically identifies that SLPs can help with social skills by helping kids use language for different reasons. So whether that's requesting or greeting or commenting or informing, there's all those different communication intents. We help children change their language for the listener or the situation. So that means that you're talking differently to a baby than you would with an adult. Maybe you are giving more information to someone who's not familiar with you than you would with someone who knows you really well. We talk a lot in my sessions about formal and informal situations, right? So whether you're talking with a friend or you're talking with a teacher, even things like that. And then again, this idea of following hidden rules. So, you know, taking turns and using gestures and body language and knowing just even how close to stand to someone. So yes, the short answer, speech and language pathologists definitely focus on these social skills, and they can do this in one-on-one sessions. They can do this in group sessions and dyads. Really, I take a lot of students out into the community to practice some of these things. So there you can find SLPs, of course, at organizations like CHC. You can find them in the public schools serving these kids if your kids have IEPs, private clinics, hospitals, all sorts of things. So going beyond speech and language therapy, you can also do a lot of great work at home by following your child's lead. So Stanley Greenspan is another, he's a psychologist, but you might have heard of the Greenspan floor time approach, and that approach is all about learning how to follow your young child's lead at home. And they use a lot of interactive play to really use what your child is interested in. Given the current state of this new coronavirus era, there's a lot of time to figure out what your child is interested in and use what you have at home to kind of interact with your child, make it fun and play with them. So if they like arts and crafts, do a craft project together. If they like to cook, or they like to be in the kitchen when you are cooking, definitely find some ways to give them a role. Maybe they're the mixer, maybe they're the recipe reader. All of those things are really good options. then again, there's also the social skills or social thinking groups. So things like social thinking down in San Jose, they have some social thinking groups. There's also many social thinking groups kind of all across the Bay Area, but these are especially helpful for giving your child the opportunity to get some feedback from someone other than you or their teacher or an adult. So social skills groups are great because they incorporate, a trusted clinician or a therapist who can provide that feedback on the spot, but also coach the other kids in the group on how to give feedback and how to figure out what other kids are thinking and feeling. And things like that. So it's great to help them learn to work collaboratively with others. Groups are great to help kids generalize skills, maybe that they're working one-on-one with a therapist, and then generalize them into larger groups as well. Again, if schools, maybe you can encourage your SLPs or whomever's running the group to think outside the box and do a lunch bunch, or have a friendship group after school or a game group. All of these things are really helpful. Again, even finding groups where that really capitalize on your kids' interests can be helpful. So there's some equestrian groups, there's drama groups and improv groups, and all those kinds of things are really great for fostering social skills development. Another great way to you can do this at home if, like right now, groups might not be easily accessible. So again, Michelle Garcia Winner, and this is a picture of Pamela Crook, talking about thoughts and feelings. So this idea that eyes have thoughts and using thought bubbles to demonstrate that. So thoughts, when we talk about theory of mind and perspective taking, it's grounded in this idea that other people have thoughts, you have thoughts, we have thoughts about each other. It's quite complex, right? So using thought bubbles, and I have drawn them on Post-it notes, I have drawn them on whiteboards, I've drawn them maybe even in some books, to really make this idea that thoughts, we're making that abstract idea of thoughts more concrete, right? And we're talking about and modeling what kind of thoughts we're having and thinking out loud. This other idea of thoughts is that, if something happens and it gives me a thought, I'm thinking, that something that happened was expected or it was unexpected. It made me feel kind of uncomfortable or comfortable. So that's a really great way to talk about kind of these expected and unexpected behaviors. The other thing is teaching not only eye contact for some of our older kids, but again, that your eyes point at what you're thinking about. I'm sure we've all had those kids who say, I'm listening, I promise, but you're watching their eyes looking all around the room. So focusing on the thought that I know you're thinking about me when your eyes are pointing at me. So we often talk about eyes are like arrows, they point at what we're thinking about. We'll get into social observation in a little bit, but again, that goes directly into figuring out what those expected and unexpected behaviors are. Again, modeling turn taking, using social scripts. These are all great ways. The more we can be models for our kids on the spectrum, the more successful we can help them to be. This is another example. As we said, we incorporated a lot of visuals into this webinar. But again, this idea, I'm sure we have a lot of kids, either our own kids or kids we've seen in schools, or out in the community where they're very blunt and they like to say exactly what they're thinking, right? This is a great quick lesson to talk about and differentiate the difference between a thought bubble or a speech bubble, right? And that idea that you do not have to say everything that you are thinking, and maybe even working on some flexible thinking about how to shift something that you might be thinking about in your thought bubble and say something different. So this is a great visual I like to share with kids because it really makes that nice differentiation between a thought bubble and what you're thinking about versus what you can actually say. And it also gives make some of those hidden rules, those rules that were not explicitly taught, more explicit. So you put something in a speech bubble and you say it, if it's a good time for everyone, it's a good place, you're saying it to the right or expected person, and it's good for everyone involved. Again, we're continuing to talk about this idea of explicit teaching of skills. So we wanted to make sure in this webinar that we incorporated some ideas and ways you can address these skills at home, because that's where we all are right now, right? So this idea of shared attention is that idea that you and your child are both focusing and thinking about the same thing, right? So again, you can do this by following your lead, like I mentioned, following your child's lead, like I mentioned earlier. And so, for example, if they are interested in arts and crafts, Pinterest can be a very overwhelming place, but they do have some very simple crafts to make where you don't need many materials. I personally like to use ones where it's just paper and markers. Maybe some glue because I am not super artistic. So I've actually made this heart craft before, and there are so many different ways to do it. So this is great because you could be drawing the heart and your child could be watching you. You could draw the heart and then ask your child to also draw the heart. You can be folding those pieces into kind of those accordion legs and arms, and then have your child kind of watch you and figure out what they need to do next, right? So you can see there's a lot of different ways to level this up. Using things like marble mazes or just playing peekaboo. Again, you don't need a lot of materials, but these are great ways to really grab your child's attention and play some games and make it fun to really establish that shared attention. Again, the more simple they can be, the better. Some things that I like to have on hand that I think that are easy to find at home are things like mason jars or Ziploc baggies, where you can, if the thing you're making or playing with has many pieces, put them in there so the child can see what's in there. And then you can work on requesting where they can see, oh, I really want that. And you can work on, can I have the marble or can I have the red paper, and things like that. So those are some other great ways to focus on that at home. Now, here, as I mentioned, I promised we would talk about this social observation idea. So social observation is a great way for kids on the autism spectrum to really kind of learn more about their environment, right? I think we have found some students who seem like they're more aloof or they don't care. It's because they're not tuned into what's going on around them. So it's really important to take the time before entering a new situation to observe and figure out what's going on. So, if you're at home and there's siblings around, talk about like, oh, I wonder what Tommy's doing in the kitchen. And you are kind of thinking out loud, and you might be standing just outside the kitchen and watching and making guesses about what do you think he's making or what meal do you think he's having. You can do this at the park, back when there were lots of kids at the park, and hopefully soon when there will be more. Kind of before your child runs onto the playground, take the time to stop, let them know that you're going to do this beforehand, and just sit on a bench and watch and talk about some of those expected behaviors you're noticing of, oh, I see that girl's waiting really nicely at the top of the slide. She's waiting until Tommy slides all the way down to the bottom of the slide before it's her turn. That's what's expected. And you might need to do this many, many times before your child really gets it, right? So I've also gone to, again, back when there were many people out and about, but I've gone to Stanford Shopping Center or another mall and really talked about just what kinds of people we're seeing. I call it social spying. And we do it subtly when we are kind of talking about who's around us, but making guesses, for your older kids about how different people know each other. So, are they friends? Is it a mom and a son? Is it a dad and a daughter? Those kinds of things. Who do you think works at a certain store? All of those are really good ways to kind of just support observation skills at home and in the community. This is another great visual. Sarah Ward is kind of a guru of executive functioning, but because social skills and executive functioning are so intertwined, I really like this visual because it really breaks down what you need to notice when you walk into the room, right? So first, the strategy is called stop and read the room. So it talks about space, time, objects, and people. And so you and really think about what kind of space is it? Is it an office? Is it a classroom? This is great for at home right now. Maybe your bedroom turned into an office, right? So helping kids figure out, is somebody working? Are they just hanging out? All those kinds of things. Getting them to be more in tune with the time of day and what's happening in the moment. And again, really breaking it down through what objects are here? What do I need to be aware of? And then getting to the people and thinking about some more of those kind of aspects of the social interaction we talked about earlier. Again, this is another social thinking book and strategy. So You Are a Social Detective is a book by Michelle Garcia Winner and Pamela Crook. And this is one of kind of, if you're first delving into social thinking, this is a great place to start because it really helps kids in a kind of comic book form be better social observers. So it talks about expected and unexpected behaviors, and it talks about different brain smarts and noticing what kids are doing and thinking with your eyes and thoughts and feelings. This is just one page in the book. Oops, sorry. And it talks about kind of what people are doing that are unexpected. And they talk about how we need our brain and our body to be a part of the group. And it really is a great book because it breaks things down really explicitly and makes kind of that abstract much more simple and provides easy language to use as well. This is actually a scavenger hunt that I made with a client while we were at CHC. So we went around and we tried to find someone who was working, someone who was playing, someone who was sitting with a parent, and someone who works at CHC, but then we broke down the clues. And so thinking about kind of, well, how do I know they're working? What's their body doing? Oh, they're sitting at a desk. Oh, this looks like an office. I'm making a guess that their brain is thinking about their work because they're looking at a computer and I'm not hearing them talk, right? Or maybe their words are, I'm hearing them on the phone or things like that. Someone who works at CHC, maybe getting kids to notice if someone's wearing a badge or if they're not, and really helping them notice those clues that they observe and heard. Again, helps them be more in tune with their environment. And then once they start to notice these things, you can talk about some of those expected and unexpected behaviors. Visual supports are another excellent way to support our kids. We know that kids on the autism spectrum often need and see a high benefit from pairing visual with verbal support. So I've done this in conversation with just writing certain things down, but visual supports are really helpful, if not crucial, to routines and success and that kind of thing. So some things that might be helpful now are things like visual schedules. If you're in a brand new routine at home, this one is just a simple, like, here is the morning routine, right? Here are all the different steps. You can modify these if your children need something more interactive. You can put some Velcro on the back and they get to take something off or they get to put something on once they've finished this. These things like these visual schedules really help to front load these kids and help them know what to expect. I often say a lot of these kids are kind of living in the moment and living in the nowness of now. They really struggle to see what's happening in the future or what's going to happen in the future and remembering what happened in the past. They're really living in that moment. So if you use a visual schedule, it can really help them to see what's coming next. This other one, first, next, then, if you have kids with lower language levels, using things like this and using just simply first we're going to brush our teeth, then we're going to put on our pajamas. That can be really helpful as well. And again, this one was set up for some use with Velcros and things like that. You can use communication supports even when playing fun games, like Simon Says. So again, you can see how here, when this person says, you can see it's in a speech bubble, not a thought bubble. But when the boy says, Simon Says, jump, they all jump. And then it says always follow the command after the phrase. So again, even if a teacher has taught Simon Says, the child can reference the written instructions. So it's not always, they're not always so reliant on teacher or parent prompting either. These are some regulation supports. So Leah Kuipers is an occupational therapist who created kind of the curriculum zones of regulation, so which is the size of the problem visual on your right. So again, we know that regulation is a huge piece of expected social communication. So if your child is dysregulated, whether they're overwhelmed, anxious, scared, you name it, they're not going to be able to demonstrate what's expected or show you what they know in terms of social skills. So their regulation is important to their ability to interact in a positive manner with others. So this 5-point scale was created kind of by Carrie Dunn-Barron. She does this 5-point scale. What's great about a 5-point scale is it helps kids on the spectrum who are typically very literal, concrete, black and white thinkers think more in those gray areas, right? So we all know those kids who think everything is either not a problem at all, or it causes a huge meltdown, or you know, screaming, yelling, crying. But being able to break these down into, well, what's kind of a level 3 size problem, or what's a level 2? That can be really, really helpful. The size of the problem visual is part of that zones of regulation where they talk more about the green, yellow, blue, and red zones. Again, another great visual support to help kids really identify their thoughts and feelings related to certain situations and regulating their own emotions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Andi. So before I get started on the next section, I did want to remind everyone to use the Q&A for your questions, or to use the chat feature to make any comments, and our lovely moderators will be helping us with that. So one thing that we can do, especially at home, is use social stories. This is one of the most common interventions, and we use this a lot in therapy, but also this is something that can be very useful in the home as well. We like it because it uses a multimodal presentation. So not only are you using these visuals that Ms. Andi was talking about, but you're also often reading it with your child, as well as incorporating things from their world that they're familiar with. So social stories are usually short stories that are created to help children understand a specific social situation, or to learn more about something, or to know what to expect. So we want to include things like the background, you know, the understanding why this is important, what the child's thoughts and feelings are, the thoughts and feelings of other people, and then the steps needed to navigate the situation. So what we often suggest is to use your own pictures in making social stories. We have an example of one that'll be following, but often, especially now in this age, everyone has access to a high quality camera, often on their cell phone. And so taking a picture of pieces of what's going to go into the social story can make it more real for your child, as well as you can also take the pictures with your child so that it means even more to them. We can use these in everyday situations, such as going to bed, or they can be used for things like routines, like getting ready in the morning, or something that's more unique, like going to the doctor's office, or something like in our times right now, learning more about the coronavirus and how it's affecting their world. We often recommend to use them as bedtime stories or for stories during story time to normalize some of these and to practice multiple times. So the important thing to remember about this is just to be creative and to have fun. So this social story is one specifically written by Autism Speaks, and this is specifically to explain the situation that we're all undergoing right now. And so we're not gonna, I do have the entire social story in here, but what I wanted to bring your attention to is just kind of some of the elements that we want to see in a social story. So we start off with just saying, so what is the story about? So the story is about how everyone gets sick sometimes. And then, so the first slide tells us about why people get sick. So talking about germs, and then how then this might affect you as a person. And then normalizing that sometimes we can get very sick, but it might be scary, but that it is okay because there are things that we can do to make it better. As well as what's happening out in the world as well, and normalizing feelings such as being scared. And then walking through kind of what we want the child to do, which is learn about hygiene. And so we have a picture for each of the steps in hand washing, which I'm sure you guys have seen multiple times. And then also what else we want them to do, such as singing happy birthday twice for 20 seconds. And then when you should do this, and other options such as using hand sanitizer. And then also things about covering their mouth with the tissue or their arm, and why. And again, there's visuals for each of these. And then also normalizing that even if we do use good hygiene, sometimes we still get sick. There are other things out there besides coronavirus. And so normalizing that why we would want you to stay home, and also this is an opportunity to talk about why nobody is going to work or able to leave or go to school, and also normalizing that, yeah, it can be very scary and that it's okay to feel that way, but what can we do about it? And so talking about why we're closing some of the schools, when we can go back, what to expect next. And then what's also really important in social stories is also to have a list or kind of a recap. So again, this can be also done with more pictures. This is just kind of one that's a little bit more word heavy. And then there's a place in this particular one to insert your own photos. So you can use this kind of template in a lot of ways, where you can have things like clip art, or you can make your entire social story just with your own pictures. There's a lot of apps nowadays and templates where you can print them out, or you can even use them on your phone. And we have some of those resources at the end.
Not related to coronavirus, but again, something you can do at home. This is another example of just a much more simplified social story using real pictures. So again, if you're thinking about making smoothies, you would start with what you need, and then you would say yogurt, blueberries, strawberries, and a blender, right? And then we put the blueberries and strawberries and the yogurt in the blender, right? So again, this is using real pictures and helping kids not only with kind of figuring out what to do in the situation, but being able to predict and use their language to talk about what they're doing in the moment. Social behavior mapping is another social thinking strategy similar to social stories, but again, for kids with more language, it really kind of outlines the social emotional chain reaction. As you can, Michelle Garcia-Winter has a whole book about social behavior mapping, but there are also, I believe, some freebies. I'm having some trouble with my screen. Some freebies like this. So this is kind of what they look like. You pick the situation that you really want your child to kind of better understand. And you talk about what the expected behaviors are. So you can see that it's outlined. My behavior in this situation is, how do others feel about it? How do they react? And then how do I feel based on their reactions? So really making it connected. You can draw pictures, you can write a couple different behaviors under expected and unexpected, different thoughts and feelings. It really helps kids with different expectations in different situations. These are some books that really do a great job of teaching social skills. So again, if you are trying to find some things that you can do at home, Julia Cook is I believe she's a clinical social worker, but she has a whole resource of different books that she has written about different topics. So you can see My Mouth is a Volcano. That's the one that just can't stop blurting, can't stop talking. Personal Space Camp, Finding Personal Space. Decibella and her 6-inch voice talks about vocal volume. The thing I like about these books is that they make it fun, and it's a great time to not only read with your child in a calm setting, but have some fun with it and provide some instruction that is not just you, right? These other ones are some other ones that are not Julia Cook, but great ways to talk about thoughts and feelings and expected and unexpected behaviors. There's also conversation strategies. So we often, when we think of social skills, we think of conversation, kind of that's the first thing we go to, right? Because that's the most obvious thing. As we mentioned, there are many other factors that play into having an expected conversation with somebody, but here are some visual strategies that can help. So using the hand of questions, many kids on the autism spectrum will ask either unexpected questions or have trouble generating open-ended questions. So using this can be really helpful when developing kind of like, who did you go to the basketball game with, rather than just, did you go to the basketball game, right? This is another flow chart that I've created and used with some students, just in terms of helping them better visualize small talk. So starting with the greeting and breaking down the different avenues and different things that can happen during a small talk conversation. I recently used this with a high schooler, and he was shocked that there were so many components to just a simple conversation. So again, the more visual you can make it, the more you can show how things flow and give options, the better. Again, making conversations visual. So if your child is struggling with reciprocity, get a ball and throw it back and forth. So you ask a question, I throw it to you, then you have to make a comment and ask me a question, and they can visually see that the ball goes back and forth as the conversation goes back and forth, and you can't throw the ball until you're done, right? You can use popsicle sticks and show how much each person has said within the conversation as well. So using just anything you can find around your house to make it more visual and more concrete. Miss Melanie, do you want to talk about these videos?
Sure. So just really quickly, since we are running out of time, videos are often a very good way to have basically a moving social story. And so there are a lot of different movies that are specifically have a curriculum for teaching thinking and social understanding. So here's a list of some of those. And the book Movie Time Social Learning basically helps you with discussing some of these social things that we've talked about in the context of these movies. So there's also this this reference as well for, there's 2 levels, one for younger children and one for more mature children, that is written to kind of help with talking about feelings and social learning. So there's some other really great things that you can find online. Pixar also, if you have Disney Plus, they have all these short films. Most of them are completely nonverbal, as in there's no language, and it's all about facial expressions and all those nonverbal and those pragmatics that we've talked about. And so watching a clip and then pausing and saying, what do you think might be happening in this? And this one's going to play, as well as things like Ellen's epic fail videos. So if you're not familiar with this, you basically they watch a clip together and they say whether or not, when they pause afterwards, is it going to be an epic win or an epic fail? So it's also incredibly funny, and it can be very unexpected. There are other videos such as Simon's Cat and other types of things. And Miss Sandy?
Simon's Cat is great too, because it's also nonverbal, and the cat also shows different emotions and thoughts and feelings. So again, if I have had kids who love cats and are highly motivated by these videos. So there's tons and tons of different Simon's Cat videos online on YouTube as well. We're just going to kind of breeze through some of these last ones. As we said, we really just wanted you guys to have these visuals, these resources to be able to check out. So we're really not going to dive deep into these. But comic strips and comic books, again, are another great way to make these kind of abstract social interactions more concrete, right? So there's an app called Show Me, and you can create a comic strip, and you can create it with your child, but it's another great thing to be able to do at home. And you can talk about what you think the next person would say. This one is obviously about compliments. Then there's the weekend conversation, again, so helping with small talk, expected and unexpected behaviors, thoughts and feelings too, and really being able to think ahead. So again, that's an app called Show Me. I believe there's a free version, but I'm not positive. Big Nate comics are really motivating to kids too. These are, you can find them online, but he's great because it's an 11-year-old, and he, you know, is the record holder at school for the most detentions. He's a self-described genius and Renaissance man. So I'm sure we all know a couple of kids like that too, but his situations that he finds himself in are very relatable. And there's a lot of discussion that these can foster as well. There's also, again, you might be familiar with the Superflex kind of curriculum and strategies. So it kind of, all of the different unexpected behaviors are different kind of I wouldn't say superheroes, but they're different characters, right? And Superflex can defeat them all. This is a list. You might find that some of your kids love to memorize what the different Superflex characters are. But again, it's the idea that you are trying to defeat these different characters. So things like Rock Brain. So Rock Brain is known for getting you stuck on your own thoughts. That Rock Brain is really inflexible. And so the idea is that you are trying to defeat Rock Brain. You are not being a Rock Brain when you're talking about it with your child, but you are really trying to work on defeating him, working on your flexible thinking and using your flexible thinking strategies. This is another book. So Superflex takes on Rock Brain and the Team of Unthinkables. This is the first book kind of in the series. And so in it, it talks all about how it uses comic strips, it uses speech bubbles and thought bubbles and all those different kinds of things. So again, a really fun way to kind of talk about these social skills. Glass Man is another one that has big reactions. He gets upset very easily. So you can see very relatable kinds of things that happen every day, and talks about some strategies to defeat these. A great way, if you are using kind of Superflex at home, look for places around your house where you think an unthinkable might lurk. So this might be, especially now, if it's a place where your child doesn't want to do their distance learning, pre-think with your child about having your kid go to sit down and think about, uh-oh, I think rock brain might be over there. What can we do to defeat rock brain, right? Then you can help them observe when other family members are having a rock brain moment. So talking about, ooh, I was really inflexible there. I think rock brain invaded my brain, but fortunately I was able to defeat him, right? And then celebrating, of course, those moments when they are using their super flexible thinking. Finally, for older kids who love graphic novels, there are some good resources for that as well. So this one is called the Middle School Confidential series. It is on YouTube, and it is also an app. So they're graphic novels, and they follow a group of 7th graders at Milldale Middle School. And so they talk about friends versus bullies, and being taken advantage of and things like that. So again, just another great series to kind of try to find your child's interest, right? This is the last one, Social Fortune or Social Fate. It talks about both kind of sides of a situation. So a social fortune is something that went really expected, and was successful. So you can see again the use of speech bubbles and thought bubbles. And then of course the social fate is what was unexpected, and then really provides a great way to talk about why things went wrong or why things were successful. And again, uses kind of that graphic novel or visual support to really ground the kids in those things as well.
So in conclusion, some obstacles to success are low dose. So what we mean by this is, as with anything, things need to be practiced in order to be, for anyone to be successful. And so we want to make this an everyday part of what we do. There's so many, as we've discussed, there's so many times during the day where we have to be social, and there are so many opportunities, and utilizing a lot of these different strategies can really help with helping kids see things more flexibly, because children with autism often have difficulty with generalizability. So if we look at something in one situation, helping your child draw that parallel to whatever new situation you're in, pointing those things out and making it more explicit. The other part is everything can look great in a vacuum, but as we know, social situations are varied, and it's also very, there's shades of gray and things that are not they can't be anticipated. And so we want to make sure that we're practicing it again in multiple settings, and that we're using it flexibly, and give them more opportunities for generalization, as well as, trying to keep it fresh and new is always hard, I think, in any curriculum, but the child also has to be engaged. As we know, learning only happens from a place of joy. So we want to make sure to minimize some of the other barriers that we were talking about at the beginning, so that they can be present for these things that are going to be harder. And then the more that we can make it fun, and the more that we can relate it to things that they find difficult, or for them to find the joy in some of these things, the better they're going to be able to generalize. All right, so that is our presentation. Thank you guys so much. We'll take some questions from our moderators.
Thank you so much, Andi and Melanie. Really appreciate you both giving this presentation. So yeah, we're going to go through the questions now. If anyone wants to add in their questions, please feel free to do so in the Q&A. But the first question we have is, what are some best practices to educate my autistic child while at home?
I'm trying to figure out how to see you guys.
Did you both get that?
Yeah, so what are some best practices say that again?
What are some best practices to educate my autistic child while at home? And I'm sure in particular to this time that we're all facing right now.
So yeah, go ahead.
One of the, I think, most important things, kind of even before you get to the learning, is setting up some new routines. So we all know things have shifted drastically from what we're used to. And so again, using those visual schedules, setting timers for different things, and really helping your child know what to expect in terms of whether it's different subjects or different activities. That's one really good way. And that might take some getting used to, or a couple days, even a week or two to. Melanie, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think part of it is also, it's a very difficult question to answer right now because everybody is in the same boat. And so standards are going to change. There's also such big difference between what families are being provided in terms of service, or in terms of homework packets or distance learning or any of those types of things. So I think it's an unprecedented time, like we keep saying. And so I think, like Miss Andi's saying, the more that we can kind of create a structure to try to continue what they were already learning, and to to work on what is functional to what your new home situation is going to reduce everyone's stress. And then we're all going to figure this out together as we kind of figure out, because we don't currently even know right now when this is going to end and whether or not they're going to be going back to school and what's going to be expected of children in the interim. So what we like to focus on then is kind of the functional aspects of what's going to make home life easier for families.
Mm-hmm. Do either of you have any favorite online resources, whether it's like virtual sites or apps to keep kids engaged?
So here are some of our resources, which will be in the slide deck.
And I would say too, so these are great resources. And like we said, anytime you can find some of those videos and incorporate them, that's great. So taking some of these things and kind of applying them to your current situation are going to probably be the most helpful right now.
Yeah, there are some, depending on what area, there's lots and lots of different resources. So if it's specifically about those aspects of social learning versus some things that are more related to explaining this situation to families, yeah.
Great. And this presentation will be on our resource library. So if anyone wants to access the PowerPoint presentation, it will be on chconline.org/resource library. So yeah, just going through the questions again. My son was diagnosed on the spectrum at 13. Do you have any recommendations for building social skills in older children, teenagers?
So depending on kind of what level, it's hard to say without really knowing your child. But I think referring to Social Thinking's website, referring to some of the Autism Speaks resources are really good places to start in figuring out kind of what your child needs right now. Again, for that middle school, I think, Mike, did you say 13?
13. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so again, for middle school, using some of those graphic novels, making up stories to kind of make your own social stories or things like that can be really helpful too.
Mm-hmm.
We often suggest meeting individually with a specialist first to kind of see what are some of the barriers. And then at that age, a lot of it is peer-based. So finding a group of some kind can also be very helpful. So to have an individual services to work on specific areas, and then having group access so that they can practice those skills in a more naturalistic setting.
Mm-hmm. Now, if someone is looking to navigate resources for their child, say they just got a diagnosis or they're looking for an evaluation, particularly now with everything going on, what do you two recommend as far as seeking out, treatment or the proper appropriate help?
So in terms of evaluations, so that's actually that's what I do. My specialty is ASD evaluations. And so what pretty much everyone in the country is doing right now is doing the parent portions first through telehealth, and then doing the child specific assessment whenever we reopen in physical sense, because we're still open. So that would be my recommendation, is to find a center of excellence to start the process, so that at least that part can be finished. And then also your team, in meeting with you, will also be able to provide you much more specific feedback about areas to work on, even if they haven't met your child yet. There are requirements, obviously, in terms of the evaluation to be able to start some services, but at least you'll have that part and they can make referrals for you. So that would be my recommendation.
Next question, what are some ideas of how I could help my first grader engage with peers via video conferencing during this time?
So a great way, and I have been working on this with some students and clients that I currently see, is talking about what's similar about video conversation and what's different about it. So what's similar to your usual interactions with your classmates or your peers? Things like, oh, it's the same people. Oh, I can remember something about that person, or I know that person really likes this. What's different is you're really just seeing their face, and you are now talking almost like you're talking to a computer. But what's the same is it's still the same person, and they can hear you the same way. So talking about it that way and breaking it down, reminding them of some of the expected behaviors about kind of video chats and things like that. So, and those are actually pretty similar to classroom expectations and just conversations in general. So again, kind of that same thing, but making a list and talking about kind of like, oh, what's expected during this video call? Oh, it's expected to wait until Miss Melanie's done talking before I chime in. It's expected that she can see my face and that I'm not making silly faces, and that I'm really showing her and looking at the camera and showing her that I'm listening. And really just kind of making those things explicit. One more thing is probably brainstorming who you're going to have the video chat with beforehand. So, oh, I'm going to call Miss Melanie tonight. What do I remember about her? What's one, maybe two questions I can ask her to see how she's spending her time at home? That the more you can kind of front load your child, the more success they'll have in the moment.
This is another great time to do a social story, to kind of go through the basics of, what do we want to do. Another thing that we've seen a lot with our clients right now is having another activity, and so you're not just kind of staring at each other through a screen is really helpful. So there are a lot of museums and aquariums that have virtual walkthroughs that you guys can do together if you do screen shares, kind of like what we're doing, or there are online games that they can play, and then having some conversation prompts, like Miss Andi said, front loading for some of those, but also kind of taking some of the pressure off. For a lot of kids, it's really hard to just stare at someone and talk to them. So giving them like another activity to do while they practice some of their conversation skills can take the pressure off a little as well.
Another great thing about being at home too is kind of having that show and tell type experience too. So if there's something really cool that you made at home, or maybe you have a favorite stuffed animal or even a pet, kids often are really motivated these days to show off what's at home. And that can be a great kind of starting point too.
Wonderful. Are you both doing any social groups for teenagers, specifically for via Zoom or online?
I don't have any right now, and I would say it's probably more important to meet each student for my own purposes before I decide to put them in a group too. So I don't have any teenage groups right now.
Gotcha.
Same, yes. At CHC, we don't currently have any.
Okay, going on to the next question. Can Superflex be used for teenagers?
I would say my general answer is yes, but I would say it sort of depends on the cognition and motivation of the teenager as well. I would say the concepts can certainly be applied to teenage life, but it depends on kind of how motivated they are by those comic books and those characters. I've worked with kids on the spectrum who are lower language and lower cognition who love them, but some of my more kind of level 1 on the spectrum and more higher functioning kind of don't like it as much, but I would say it totally depends on the kid.
Awesome. Our son has good conversational skills with familiar people, but when it comes to group or 2 or more, he has a hard time. Any suggestions?
Again, similar to what he's doing in a conversation with people that he does know. So part of the reason that the conversation feels better is because he knows the people and it's much more comfortable, right? But there's all of those different kind of aspects of social interaction come into play. Now he doesn't only have to think about one person or someone he knows, but he has to be thinking about all those other people involved, right? So again, doing some of that front loading, talking about maybe bringing some different conversation topics to the group. If you're able to, doing some social observation first of like, oh, there are those 2 friends. What do we remember about them? What could you say to them? Kind of having that whole conversation beforehand can be really helpful. And sometimes just starting by helping your child share space in a group. So if they're feeling really anxious or struggling to strike up the conversation or even maintain it in the group, just support them by standing in the group and just being an active listener. And of course, kind of teaching what that looks like, but just like, hey, you know what, today you don't have to talk. Let's start by just listening and hearing about what's going on with everybody else.
Yeah, I also think it's important, to understand why it's more difficult. So is it because they're becoming overwhelmed, because there's just so much going on that they have to keep track of? Is it anxiety of just not, if it's not a person that they're familiar with, their anxiety kind of chokes them up. And so as a psychologist, working with a therapist on coping skills can be really helpful. Doing social stories again to kind of plan it out a little bit more concretely, and then preparing scripts as well of kind of what are some things that you can go to kind of give your brain a little bit of a break so that you can collect yourself. What are some coping skills that you can use in the moment so that you can keep your body ready to engage with people.
Mm-hmm. Do you think virtual groups can help with that? Not having that face-to-face interaction, but possibly having more of an interaction online with, in a group setting per se, or more people involved.
Now is the perfect time to try.
Yeah. I would say absolutely. I think you're still part of a group. You're definitely having that face-to-face interaction. If not physically sharing space, you're sharing virtual space. If one more thing I was thinking about, if your child is struggling when there's more than one person, sometimes it's hard to just remember in terms of language processing what everyone's saying. So if you're sitting next to your child, write some things down that you heard someone say and just kind of slide it over to them so that if they're readers, they can read and remember and kind of keep that information as the conversation keeps going. It just helps them kind of keep up a little bit better.
Right. And it's actually great in video because they can mute themselves and you can just be like, hey, I noticed, and chime in a little bit and be that little voice on their shoulder, as well as the fact that they can mute themselves and take a minute to just kind of gather themselves again, which can be helpful. So honestly, in this time, since we're doing physical distancing and not social distancing, it's a great time to try for sure.
Wonderful. Next question, how do you improve the perspective taking in a 9-year-old girl with high functioning autism who is very self-centered?
That's a great question, but without knowing that specific child, I would say I don't have specific strategies that I think would be the most helpful. I think I would definitely kind of consult and maybe have an initial conversation with the specialist about that too. There's lots of strategies out there, but again, without knowing your child specifically, it makes it a little bit more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that one of my supervisees did that was very helpful, and again, I'm not sure if this will be helpful for your daughter not knowing her, but they did dioramas where they would, kind of set up scenes with multiple people and then just kind of take turns talking about it from each of the dolls' perspectives. Even if just like a scene of what do you see that's different, and then kind of moving along those lines. Okay, well, if what you see is different, then how do you what do you think she would think if she saw this because she couldn't see this part, and having some of those conversations. And then like Ms. Andi said, it is good to kind of speak with a professional to get some more personalized strategies, because every child is very unique and there are a lot of different things that can contribute to why that might be difficult for her. One more thing I actually wanted to say about the last question as well is who gets overwhelmed sometimes with strangers and having multiple conversations. Speaking from an assessment perspective, it's always good to also take a look at other things that might be affecting their ability to process that information quickly, whether it's an auditory processing weakness, which means that auditory input could get a little garbled, especially if there's multiple people, and especially if you're not familiar with the pattern of speech of someone else. And so, talking with a speech and language pathologist about that, or a psychologist about what might also be contributing to some of those things if it's not just anxiety.
And one more thing about the girl who's higher functioning. I've also done it, just one more thing I was thinking about, again, I'm not sure if this would work, but coming up with situations and having your daughter give advice to those people and talking about what would you do if you were in that situation. That gets into some of that role playing, which we didn't talk about quite as much, but that's another really good strategy. Like, oh, so-and-so has this problem, and you know that it's similar to whatever situation that she's encountered, but kind of helping her work through it that way by giving that mystery person advice or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Great. So for a high functioning kiddo with ASD who is about to be 3 years old, what would be a good book for parents to explore that targets social skills? Could it be Being a Social Detective by Michelle Garcia Winner?
So I would look at a couple of different options. So looking at some maybe potentially more of the floor time approach, Stanley Greenspan's work. And I don't think we have it on there, but we can get that for you. It's a quick Google search of the floor time approach by Stanley Greenspan.
Engaging your child with autism.
What is it?
Engaging your child with autism.
Yeah, there you go. Michelle Garcia Winner does also have what they call an early learner curriculum. They do make it, they say it's for ages 4 and up, but certainly something you can look into. It's called the We Thinkers curriculum, they might have changed it recently, but if you go to the Social Thinking website, they also break it down by different ages too. But that one's great. The We Thinkers are great. They have a whole nother set of storybooks that break down some of those concepts we talked about today, and talk about how you can incorporate collaborative play into some of those things, and really get your child engaged that way.
Yeah, there's also some, and Miss Andi can speak to this more, but some of Hannon's materials, Hanen, it is more specifically about building speech, but there's a lot of really good information in there about, just being more just functional and pragmatic language and building some of those foundational steps that lead to more social thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So you both have mentioned a lot of strategies tailored for younger kids. Do you have any specific strategies, and what can parents, caretakers do for teenagers to promote social skills?
The first thing that comes to mind, and I know it's not super helpful right now, but is to get out into the community and use really functional skills. So even right now at home, helping your older child, I say child, your teenager, help you cook, learn the cooking routine, figure out what their role is. Even though that it's more concrete, there are certainly many steps to follow, figuring out where to stand so you're not in someone else's way, what to say, how to strike up a conversation while you're cooking, at a meal, all of those kinds of things. If you're going out for a walk, you can certainly do some social observation now and figure out who else is out and about and what they might be doing. Again, using videos. I work with a lot of teenagers and adolescents, and everybody loves videos. It kind of takes the pressure off of them to produce some sort of skill or show you what they know, and they're able to kind of more talk about what's going on in the video and connect with you that way. So using some things like that, but the more functionally you can make it by going out into the community, reading in books, talking even about what they're reading if they, are readers and they have to read something for school, what different perspectives or things like that happened in some of those books and chapter books. Those are some great ways too.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of it is, at that age, developmentally, it is more peer related, and that's a lot more difficult to do in this day and age. And so any opportunities to facilitate some peer interactions would also be really helpful. So doing video chats, having them play a game together that isn't a video game necessarily, because that can, lead to other things, but more like some sort of an interactive game where there's more talking, and then you can also be their social coach while sitting nearby as well. And then the graphic novels.
I was also thinking about, there's a lot of great tabletop games out there right now too that certainly require and require social skills and provide excellent opportunities for teaching opportunities. So lots of teenagers love Apples to Apples. There's a game called Exploding Kittens. Things like there's another great game that works a lot on smart guesses and using critical thinking and abstract language, Cat Crimes. Things like headbands and heads up, and all of those are really good because there's so much social interaction with that. You could talk about how does it feel if you get a clue wrong, or if you made a smart guess and you thought you were right. So that winning and losing, turn taking, even just having appropriate reactions in some of those games can be great.
Okay, so my son's school speech teacher is not available during school closure. We have a lot of assignments for general ed. What could I do to help him engage in some of the speech and social skills? Are there any social classes online or via Zoom? He's in first grade.
So to kind of just plug ourselves a little bit, we do have those services available. We do also have free 30-minute consultations, and we have speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, psychologists, master's level mental health clinicians, psychiatry, etc. And so all of our services do remain open, and we do provide the support in telehealth. Since we do have 2 schools on site as well, we do have available supports in some of those things. I think Ms. Andi is helping some of her students with exactly those things.
And what's great too is, it's unfortunate that the school speech and language pathologist is not available, but although we're using Zoom and things like that, there is this cool opportunity for screen sharing and things like that too. So literally using the materials that they have is actually even more accessible now, because you don't have that like, oh, we're coming to a different office. Oh, I forgot that thing in my backpack in the car. It's literally right on your computer. So that's another great kind of perk.
Yeah, and I also actually came across a website called shatterpack.org. and they have a wonderful list of resources. That they have quite a wide range of online learning and specific resources for kiddos with learning differences and kids that have autism. So I would definitely check out that website as well for more resources. So this person wrote, I am an instructional aide. How do you organize better strategies in the classroom specifically?
I think the best answer to that is working collaboratively with the primary classroom teacher to make sure that the rules are explicit. One thing I found sometimes in classrooms, depending if it's a general ed or a special ed, is teachers often think their rules are explicit because the rules are written on the wall on a poster. But for our kids, having that poster next to maybe 10 other posters is not obvious enough. And so whether maybe if the particular student or students you're working with, maybe they need a smaller visual support taped onto their desk so that you can cue them along the way of remembering those different behaviors. Maybe you need to just focus on 1 or 2 behaviors at a time because the rest are overwhelming. So things like that. So really, really thinking about ways you can make it more concrete and draw the student's attention to whatever it is they need to be focusing on.
Yeah, I think also, like we've said before with front loading, anticipating those pain points, or when there are more difficulties or things that get in the way of the flow of how the class should be, and then working with the teacher to come up with plans for specific students or for those specific transition times.
One more thing is thinking again with the teacher about different roles the particular students you're working with can play in the classroom. So if they are the person that constantly needs to feel like they have a job, thinking about maybe they can be the paper passer outer, maybe they can be the one that gets to call on some of the other kids sometimes. If they're having trouble participating in story time or something like that, maybe the goal, like I said, is just to work on sitting quietly and not actively engaging in the rest of the material. So just kind of playing with what you can do within that setting. Overall, a great thing that's really helpful for all kids, no matter the age, is giving kids a job and a job title. So I call it job talk. So anytime you can add an ER onto anything, so whether you are I've had kids where I'm reading a book and I'm the reader, they're the page turner, right? That lets them know they need to keep their hands in their lap before they start, instead of kind of getting all over the book. And then when it's time to turn the page, okay, who's the page turner? You are, and you can keep going. In the classroom, like I said, maybe you are the schedule maker and you get to write on the board, or maybe you're the door holder or things like that. The more you can kind of label it, again, makes that more abstract concept of we're all going to get in line. It gives them a very specific role and an explicit way to participate in those different kind of social activities.
Okay, another question. You said by making videos for what they're feeling for teenagers, are there any apps to go along with that?
I missed the first part. Could you say that again?
Yeah, well, are there any specific apps, if you could address that, for teenagers?
I don't use a lot of apps in my work, but there are some. Doodle Buddy is one where you can literally take a picture of anything and then like draw thought bubbles over it. That's a good one. Chatterpix is another one where I think you can take pictures and actually make the inanimate objects talk. So again, you can create dialogue, but it's not exactly your child talking. And I believe there are free versions of those as well. So it's Chatterpix and Doodle Buddy.
Great. Well, we are just about done here. Thank you so much to our panelists and our attendees. We greatly appreciate you all being here this evening and experiencing our first Community Connections webinar. Melanie, if you can go back one slide, there is just a link, if you all don't mind taking a second and going here just to fill out a quick survey. We greatly appreciate it. It helps us for planning future community education sessions, and it also allows us to report back to our donors and go forward with future sessions, in particular for parent education and professional development for educators. So thank you again. And yes, we could put the link. Someone's asking if we could put the link in the chat. I will put the link here for everyone. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.